Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lex Dei Podcast, where we ask tough questions and get real answers. My name is Rap. In this podcast, we will try to deep dive into some of our generation's rarely spoken questions on current social issues. We aim to present the Lex, meaning law or the Constitution, and other laws passed by Congress side by side with the Dei, meaning God, or the Christian teachings to give light to those questions. Today, we have with us a lawyer and a teacher, Atty. Alett Nuñez, and theologian and professor, Dr. Jake Yap.
Hi, Rap. Hi, Jake. And hi to all our listeners as well.
Hello there, Alett and Rap.
So I am Rap Oronce, and same as Martha, I am a full-time campus missionary for Christ's Youth in Action, the youth arm of Ligaya ng Panginoon. And again, with me are Atty. Alett and Dr. Jake Yap. Guys, just to, lay this off for you, all of you guys who are listening, these two are very passionate people. Atty. Alett is a lawyer who has shifted from mainstream law practice to working on laws and policies dealing with nature and the people. On the side, she also teaches future law and engineering students as well as DRRM practitioners to influence more hearts and minds towards the preference for the environment, the poor, the rule of law and justice. So mukhang hindi lang para sa topic na to si Atty. Alett, and we'll look forward to probably one of the next episodes on that. And with us too is Dr. Jake Yap, a theologian and is a professor in one of the foremost universities here in Manila. I have heard Dr. Jake speak many times, and I can say that he has a gift in making very complex concepts very easy to understand. So we are hoping to hear how that magic works with us here today. I would like to kick off this discussion with this clip, a real-life story that has happened years back, but is such a powerful and inspiring story related to our topic today. Let's check this out.
Natagpo ang puro saksak sa likod at palo sa ulo ang katawa ni Zenaida Sison, 75 anyos, ina ng aktres na si Cherry Pie Picache.
Halos pagsakluban ng langit at lupa si Cherry Pie Picache sa walang awang pagpatay sa kanyang ina. Close casket na nakaburol ngayon sa Arlington, Quezon City, si Ginang Zenaida Sison.
We can only hope and pray. Mabigyan ng justice yung nangyayari sa mami ko. I think no human being deserves that.
So to start our discussion on death penalty, I think it's very helpful for us to actually look at the concrete experience. Personally, wala pa ako na-experience sa close encounter with death penalty, like a loved one, both being on the victim side and on the perpetrator side. And as we look at Cherry Pie Picache's story, like nakita nyo naman yung clip, no? Like, it's very gruesome. And those moments wherein you see that these things happen, you can't help but think, like, the victims of these heinous crimes and their families deserve some sort of justice for what was done to them. And if you kill someone, don't you deserve to die too? Like, is it like, parang buhay yung kinuha mo eh. So dapat buhay din yung kapalit. Like, what's the thought there that we can anchor ourselves on?
So the Christian approach to it, we have to look at the Bible. And the Bible in the Old Testament precisely has that kind of mentality, what we call the law of retribution. So an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Actually, that law is a very moderate approach because it tries to avoid extreme retaliation. No? So if somebody damages your eye, then he should also suffer a damaged eye and so on. So it's meant to mitigate extreme punishment. No? But they were very strict in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, though, with the coming of Jesus and his message of peace and forgiveness and mercy, we see a significant shift. No? A good story to remember is the story of the woman caught in adultery. They were about to inflict on her the Old Testament law of stoning someone caught in adultery. And we know the story. Jesus said, okay, but whoever has no sin should be the first one to cast the stone. And beginning with the oldest, but they all left. No, they could not stone her. They realized that uh, justice is not enough. No, and who are we to cry out for blood and for vengeance, especially in a capital way, to take away someone's life when we ourselves are not completely free of any guilt. No? So Jesus makes the biggest difference in the New Testament.
I guess that's really true, no, Dr. Jake. Like, I agree with that. As a Christian, I resonate with those views. Pero ang daling sabihin eh. Like, lalo na kung alam natin, we're not in that victim side. Like, it may be easy for us to say, we are not the ones who lost a loved one through a gruesome crime. Like, panay mercy na lang ba? Wala bang justice sa mga ganong experience?
Right. Yeah, that's true. No, and so it might make some people think that all that Jesus preached was about mercy, but no, he also was interested in justice, or the preferred term is righteousness, doing the right thing. No? So at the end of that story about the woman caught in adultery, he said to her, "Neither do I condemn you, but go and sin no more." No? So there has to be righteousness. The right thing has to be the end result of it all. And Jesus also points us to the Father, God the Father, God Himself, who is the utmost source of all justice and mercy. So, as Christians, hindi lang pwedeng logic or using our own reason and balancing things and so on, but ultimately, we have to remember that it is God who is Lord of life and death. It is God who will execute both justice and mercy. Ang maganda rito, Rap, is that with God, it's a perfect combination of justice and mercy. Human beings, we can err on either side, either too much justice and practically no more mercy, or it's the other way around. No? Pero sa ating Panginoon, ang kagandahan nito is He is mercy and justice found together. No? He is the source of both perfect justice and perfect mercy.
Yes, definitely, Rap. We understand the victims of case of murder, for instance. It's kind of understandable that kasi nga namatayan ka eh, di ba? But is that's also what society tells them in a way. Now, apart from of course the human emotions, but also it's a sort of conditioning for society, because that's the punitive justice system that we always know. But of course, there's always another way of attaining justice, even in law. Justice can be achieved not through punitive ways, but more and more, there is a shift towards restorative justice. So, justice that does not want to beget violence from violence, but justice that would try to repair the wrong that's been done and try to make amends, not just for the victim and the victim's family, but even for the neighbors, the community, and as well as for the family of the offender themselves. No, definitely, for any crime, even for murder, although in a US survey in 2014, many did say that in case of murder, then death penalty is justified. It's morally justified because it's murder. But as I've mentioned, we don't want violence to beget violence, right? We don't want to sanction killing of another person. And the UN, the United Nations, have argued against the imposition of death penalty. First, because especially from the eyes of law, and even as mentioned by Jake earlier on, it's a fundamental violation of the right to life. And life is sacred. And even under the law, our Constitution, Article 3, Bill of Rights says that right to life is protected, is given the highest protection. And secondly, there's also the unacceptable risk of executing an innocent person, right? Kasi there could be a miscarriage of justice and that risk is just too much. Kasi pag namatay na, how can you bring back, right? If there's a new evidence that comes up, how can you bring up the dead? And then also the absence of proof that death penalty actually deters crimes like murder or other heinous crimes. There's just no science, there's just no proof to it. And finally, yun nga, it's the inappropriately vengeful character of death penalty. Kasi murder, then you also murder someone, although it's backed by legal processes. So as I've mentioned, more and more countries in the world are really abolishing death penalty. In 2014, the United Nations membership, two-thirds of them have already abolished death penalty. In 2017, AI reports that more than 100 countries have already abolished death penalty for all crimes. No, so there's a way to achieve justice and also vindication for the family, but not in a vengeful way. Definitely, when we say no to death penalty, doesn't mean that the perpetrator goes scot free. There can still be life imprisonment without parole, right? There could be other penalties. And again, really the shift towards restorative justice, as I've mentioned.
I wanna go back to the story that Dr. Jake mentioned a while ago. I'm just interested to hear you expound as well, like how the story of the adulterous woman shows this restorative justice.
Yeah, you see, there is a law that's undeniable that someone caught in adultery is to be stoned to death. No, the law is there, and if even if the intention is justice, uh, when we look at it in a bigger picture, especially involving the community now, we have to see that punitive justice does not really serve a productive end. No? What's better, and I like what Attorney Alett said. The whole idea of restorative justice that seeks restoration. Just even think of the word restoration. You know, it has a profound meaning um, of healing and bringing everything to a good closure and restoring people to their family. So I'd like to imagine. We don't know the ending of that story of the woman caught in adultery, but I'd like to think that somehow she was restored to her own family, because she was not stoned to death. She lived, and then she was able to then bring about restoration to herself, to her relationship with her own family, to her relationship with the other family that was involved in the adultery. And the community itself could be restored. So the whole idea of healing and restoring relationships, that is only made possible if the if 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 uh, if people are not put to death. Because what happens when they are put to death? It's the end of everything, and we don't even know if that is really the solution to for justice.
Tama yun, Dr. Jake, no? Like, definitely, hindi nga natin makikita yung ending ng adulterous woman if then and there, she was stoned to death. Like, automatically, we answered na, okay, there's no restoration that's gonna happen. And I guess it really is hard for us to say, lalo na kung hindi naman tayo yung directly involved and hindi sa atin nagawa yung kasalanan. I think it's also helpful to see it the other way around. It can work that way as well. Na baka we should look at instances in our life wherein we're the wrongdoers and the subject of being stoned to death. Like executing someone because they've done something grave or taken someone's life is probably revenge, not justice. It's interesting, no? I asked a friend why she's against the death penalty. And she offered me a fresh perspective. Sabi niya, if justice is serving what one is due, then the death penalty will be nothing but an easy way out for the vindicated. Like there must be an opportunity for him to atone for his wrongdoings as well. Grabe mga kaibigan, that's just the first question and we're so packed with wisdom and insights coming from our experts here. And I'm excited to get to the next point actually. Attorney Alett mentioned a few arguments against death penalty a while ago and I want to delve deeper into that. So sabihin na natin like, okay, we've laid our grounds, some of the things that we want to uphold with death penalty coming from the discussions a while ago. My next question would be like, okay, so how do we protect our society from wrongdoings and these heinous crimes? Like, di ba dapat yun yung ginagawa ng death penalty? Kaya nga nandyan yan para matakot yung mga tao na gumawa ng masama. Like, how does death penalty deter these heinous crimes? What are some of the facts that we can look at? And is there really a gain to the society if we have death penalty imposed?
Yeah, that's the usual argument against for death penalty, rap, na it deters crime. But actually, in several studies, the conclusion has been there is a lack of evidence that shows that there's that perceived deterrence. Sabi ng United Nations Office of the Commissioner on on Human Rights, it says that the perceived deterrence has been overstated and manipulated for decades. Such strong words, no? Because in one study, it showed that the research doesn't show that death penalty would have a difference in terms of the homicide rates. And then there's also another study that shows death penalty did not stop the mass atrocities in Africa, for instance. It did not stop the civil war that happened in Burundi. So it's not a deterrent. Even in the Philippines, the flag has analyzed, which the Free Legal Assistance Group has analyzed the data of the Philippine National Police itself. It has shown that during the time when death penalty was imposed, the crime rates were rising. But when death penalty was abolished in 2006, then criminality was going down. So there's no correlation between the rise of crimes and death penalty. For most crimes, no, where death penalty was imposed, it was shown that many of these offenders were suffering from mental illness or were committing the crime under the influence of alcohol and drugs. So in that state of mind, hindi mo naman iisipin kung gagawin ko ba krimen na to o hindi kasi you're not in control of your full mental faculties, right? And then also, of course, it has that for organized crime groups, for instance, they make calculated decisions that they won't be caught, they won't be detected, so they go ahead with the crime anyway. And for acts of terrorism, these are diehard fans, no, or advocates of a certain political belief, and they would die for the cause. So imposing the death penalty to them will not really deter those acts of terrorism. So wala siyang deterrence. And as I've mentioned, this science has really moved many countries around the world to abolish death penalty.
Grabe, so you're saying, Attorney Alett, like kung facts at logic lang babasehan, the presence of death penalty is really in question because it doesn't serve the purpose that we wanted it to serve.
I'm really impressed with Attorney Alett with all her many arguments, and I really agree with them. The church has similar, although not so many arguments. I think the main guiding principle for the church is the value of human life. And that is something that we have been protecting or safeguarding all this time. Life is precious. Life is a gift from God. Now, yes, we do need to protect innocent citizens from the bad intentions of certain people, no? And but the thinking now is killing them does not help in the bigger scope of things. It does not provide the solution. Surely, and this is the thinking, for example, of Pope John Paul II. Now he's the Saint John Paul II. That the modern state surely has other means of controlling people from harming others without having to put them to death. No, maybe in times past when the state had fewer resources, fewer means, perhaps then state-sanctioned execution of criminals was something that was reasonable. Nowadays, it is no longer reasonable because there are other ways. This is the argument of John Paul II. There are other ways of protecting the citizenry from criminals without necessarily having to put the criminal to death. Again, it's also valuing the life of the criminal as a person, because while the person lives, there is always the chance of repentance, and that is very important.
That's true, no, Dr. Jake. Like, it's striking to me just hearing your insights both on the law of man and the law of God, how it's clear that the death penalty, if we base it on facts and logic, it doesn't seem to be serving its purpose. So its presence, its mere presence is quite questionable. And then if we look at Pope John Paul II's call for us to rethink capital punishment, I think gusto ko balikan yung sinabi niyo, Brother JK, or actually ni Pope mismo, that there are other ways of protecting society now. And so my next question brings me to elaborating on that. Like, what if not death penalty? What then would deter these heinous crimes that we want to protect our citizens from?
Right. So this is really the certainty of arrest and conviction and the long periods of imprisonment. It's what would deter crime. It's the certainty and the immediacy of the penalty. Our Philippine Commission on Human Rights says that criminality should not be confronted by the short-term palliative solution of death penalty, but really by effective law enforcement, quick and impartial delivery of service, and a responsive penal system. And again, also the shift towards a restorative justice. No, so noong August 2020, when the country was talking about death penalty, the Philippine Commission on Human Rights tweeted and said that we should be able to find the justice that would marry it with empathy and not. I'm paraphrasing here, but not towards punitive justice, but really justice with empathy.
How about on the Christian perspective, Dr. Yap? Like, what can you say about that? What will deter heinous crimes?
Actually, it's really not the. This is something that the church says the state has to be the one to look for ways to control its the criminal elements of society and to protect the innocent members of society. The church offers guidelines, and the church is prophetic in uh, uh, sounding once again warning about a culture of death and warning about how we can disregard life and so on. But if you ask me, it's always the call to conversion. It's a longer process. No, what can deter crime? It's transformed lives, and only God can transform human lives. So it calls the church once again to evangelization, to help people come to conversion and the knowledge of God, the fear of God. It also means that we have to restore community, because community is what can bring people together and foster values and so on. But a lot of criminality has its roots in poverty, for example, and this is something that the state has to look into. Now, of course, the church can work with the state in terms of alleviating poverty. And in the last few months, of COVID-19, we have seen how the church has, and by the church I mean Christians, the Christians have been working together for helping the poor. So it really means that the church and the state must work together to bring about the greater good.
And I think our baseline here is really talking about, yun nga yung sinabi niyo, Dr. Jake, no? The right to live. Like, that's what we want to protect here. And that's what we want each and every citizen, whatever class they may come from, kung saan man dito sa lupalop na sa Pilipinas, we want them to have that right to live, whether they've done something wrong or they didn't. And I guess it's pretty clear that our stand here is that we shouldn't have the right over one another's life. Like, that doesn't give us justice. But if I were to put it again, you were saying also something about the state, and I'd like to hear some thoughts from Attorney Alett here. Like, I just want to put it on a macro level. If we were to just ask, does the state actually have this right, or can and should the state take away life?
That's the problem with the state imposing death penalty because that is an irreversible action. Once life is taken by the state, then it can no longer be brought back. And our judicial system is flawed simply because it's prone to human error, because our justice system is made up by men and women, and so it's prone to human error. So the taking of life is just too absolute and too irreversible, even if it's backed by our legal system. And many studies have shown that the death penalty has actually led to wrongful convictions. So it's a miscarriage of justice, as I've mentioned. The Office of the Commissioner on Human Rights report in 2014 showed that in the US, when the DNA was introduced as a means to provide evidence. 250 persons in 1989 were exonerated from the death from their convictions, and they were uh, freed from facing the death sentence. No, so imagine that's 250 persons. In the Philippines, in a 2004 decision of the Supreme Court, it they stated there that 7 out of 10 convictions that were brought to the Supreme Court from the trial court were actually wrong. So imagine 7 out of 10 were actually wrongfully convicted. Imagine had this not been reviewed by the Supreme Court, then that 7 out of 10 people, or around 650 people, were spared from the death penalty because of this flawed system. So it's a very punitive system that is prone to error, and the risks are just too high because, as Jake mentioned, life is just too precious wherever you are, which class, which religion, which background you come from. Every life is just important. It's the dignity of life that we want to protect.
Grabe, I can only imagine if those cases weren't reversed in time. Like, definitely lives were on the line. And this, I guess, also proves, Attorney, no, na our justice system, like the basis of our justice system is us as men. And definitely we can't call ourselves as perfect beings. Um, Anyone here in this world, I'd say I can't find a perfect person. Probably near perfect, I don't know, somewhere out there, pero si God na yung makakapagsabi nun. But definitely, if we are asked to bear lives and make decisions, matters into our own hands, like it can be quite terrifying. Like imagine we are at the mercy of the errors of humans, and that's, I guess, what we're really emphasizing here as we talk about the death penalty. I want to go back lang quickly. Dr. Jake mentioned something about the culture of death. And I think that's a very interesting concept and phrase, lalo na personally coming from the youth sector. And, being online and seeing lots of news, lots of gruesome deaths everywhere. Like, it's just so deafening. Like, I can't even, like, say what to think of these things that are happening around us. Like, can you expound on that culture of death? And since we've already talked about death penalty and what it does to us, I believe like this is also a discussion towards the culture of life, the opposite of the culture of death. So go ahead, Doctor.
Okay, just a few thoughts, no? That we have the call for the whole human race to build a civilization of love and a civilization of life, no? A civilization that celebrates life. Unfortunately, for a long time now, and especially now with the accessibility of media, we are confronted continually by images of death. And one result of that is we become very, uh, um, what do you call it? Insensitive. We become insensitive to the ghastliness of death, no? Because death is now brought into our living room via all of the media channels and so on. We become manhid, no? That's a good way to describe our attitude toward death. Oh, it's just death, we're no longer shocked by it. We're no longer bothered by it, and this rather than valuing life, we end up this kind of belittling life and making it less important because of the uh, how how death is celebrated nowadays rather than life. So that's what Pope John Paul II has been warning against. What he calls the culture of death is this pervading atmosphere of life becoming cheap and death becoming so prevalent that we accept it as the new normal. The new normal is now death rather than life, when in fact we should insist on the celebration of life.
So in this whole discussion, I think it's been inspiring to hear from Attorney Alett and Dr. Jake. And I can think of top three things that I'm hearing from them. One is, in this whole culture of death, we want to be wary that we won't be numb and apathetic and move towards the culture of life that we want to uphold. Second, we need to get out of this rut and we need to really take some action, make our voice heard, and fight fight for life, basically. And last, just hearing these theological and legal insights, I hope that you viewers or listeners will agree with me that, I think there really is no reason to put the death penalty back. And it's something that we need to fight against. But the question that's lingering in my mind right now is, when we talk about the death penalty, like, that's the whole society. It's something big about laws. And it's kind of far from me personally. Like, as I mentioned, wala akong personal experience yan eh. So I guess the viewers will also have the same question. So what? Like, how does this even affect me?
For me, the answer is, isn't life important to you? When we talk about the death penalty, ultimately, it's not about death, it's about life. It's about valuing life. And the whole issue of the death penalty is only one piece among many pieces which affirm life. No? Think of abortion, think of euthanasia, think of infanticide, and so on. Other countries which don't appreciate, which don't value life the way Christians value life, these chips are falling, so abortion comes in and euthanasia comes in and so on. You see, it's all one thing, this preservation of life, this valuing human life. And so when we try to oppose death penalty in the name of life, it's because we are affirming life in all its aspects, and we are protecting human life from womb to tomb, so all people must be protected. And I think that our viewers must see that life is worth fighting for, life is worth preserving.
Right. For young people, I would say that we're all part of society, right? Whether you're young or old, whether you're employed, later on you'll become mothers and fathers, and you want to have a society that is civilized, that is just and humane, and that really upholds the right to life. It's not only in our faith that we hold life sacred, but even in our law, in our society, the right to life is given the highest protection. And as citizens of this earth, as citizens of our country, we should all be concerned, whether young or old.
And I hope we can learn a thing or two from the inspiring story of Miss Cherry Pie Picache, how she came to forgive the perpetrator who killed her mom, her very own mom. And I hope, like, in the little things, even we can practice that kind of fight against the culture of death. That even in the small wrongdoings, we can bring ourselves to forgive. But of course, no one's saying that this will be easy. But this fight for life really starts with those things, and it matters because, as we've mentioned repeatedly throughout this podcast, life is worth fighting for. And just like that, we are ending our third episode of the Lex Dei Podcast. We'd like to thank, of course, our guests for today, Attorney Alett and Dr. Jake Yap.
Thank you, Rap.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Personally, it's been inspiring to hear from Attorney Alett and Dr. Jake Yap. I hope you guys were inspired too, and we hope to see you on our next episode. So, hindi pa po tayo tapos. So, if you have any questions or thoughts or anything really, please send them to us via our social media platforms. So we are available on Spotify, on Facebook, and on YouTube. Just search Christ Youth in Action. We are on that channel. And again, we thank you guys for being with us in this discussion, in this conversation. If you haven't, don't forget to follow and subscribe us on all our social media platforms. Again, if you like this episode, don't be afraid to share it or give us a like. Or probably if you have a friend who you know will benefit from our discussion today, don't be afraid to tag them. So again, this is Lex Dei. I am Rap Oronce, and it's been a pleasure to have you guys. We'll see you all next time.